Right, good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday morning again, and this week, as I promised you last week when I was talking to Richard Porritt, the political and business editor of the EDP, I have today as my guest, and yeah, you're going to have to forgive me all for being starstruck. I've already explained myself to Sophie as mine. I've got Sophie Thornhill, who is several time over world champion, Commonwealth gold medalist and Olympic gold medalist in her Paralympic cycling. And honestly, it's yeah, I'm going to say this from a personal point of view. When you come across people who have achieved such astonishing things, with with what we share here on the Norwich Guide Dog Forum, a visual impairment, or just generally, you just have to be in absolute awe. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you today, Sophie. I'll talk to everyone about how you came into my life in a bit, because and then about how S is for September and why you're here. But do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into cycling? Could you tell us first? Because you're a Paralympian, so you're obviously visually impaired. What do we share? What have we got in common?
I'm Sophie. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm a Paralympic cyclist. My condition that makes me visually impaired is I've got ocular cutaneous albinism. So it's something I've had since birth. And it's something that I've always tried to make sure it doesn't sort of get in my way, just the same as every other visually impaired person. They don't let it get in their way, and they just crack on and find their own way around any challenges that we might come across. My dad always used to say to me, if you can't see it, get closer, ultimately. So that was always my dad's motto.
Do you know, it's always handy to have a northerner for a dad, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Brutality, brutal, there you go.
Yeah, puts everything into perspective.
Exactly.
What do you mean? Yeah. What's the problem, Sophie?
Yes, exactly. So then I got into cycling, and again, it was something for me that I always loved riding my bike. I used to disappear around the block on my bike as a kid, so it was always something that I loved doing. And then I was lucky enough that it sort of ended up becoming my job and my career. And I'm lucky enough that I've like you say, kind of achieved those things. So that's been the last few years of my life.
I know. So tell me. So let's put it this way. I sometimes look at sporting people and think, where in my life did I have a choice to, be a rowing Olympic gold medalist? Because I don't remember ever being offered the opportunity to row or any of those things. Because I'm quite sure it's like athletics was never going to happen for me. Short legs, yeah, they may go fast, but ultimately you don't cover the same sort of miles. So what was the exposure that you had? Obviously you said you love cycling and you sort of disappear around the block, but what are the facilities around where you live or lived? How did you get into that? Because there's a big difference between mucking around with your friends out on in the back streets, and then actually getting into a coaching environment that then propels you forward and explores your talent. So how did that happen for you? Where did you go?
Well, I'm lucky enough that I'm sort of from Stockport in Greater Manchester, or Cheshire, depends who you ask. And I'm lucky enough that the Manchester Velodrome is literally down the road. It's been there since I think 1994 it was built, and it was used for the 2002 Commonwealth Games in Manchester. So we've got a world-class facility in the UK. I think it was the first indoor velodrome for a long time. And I'm really lucky that it is on my doorstep. And I got into track cycling through watching the 2008 Paralympic Games and Olympic Games, which is Chris Hoy at the Olympics, and a family friend of ours, Anthony Capps, who was also visually impaired, who rode the back of a tandem in Beijing and came away with 2 gold medals and 2 world records, and then the same again with another gold medal in London the following cycle. And he encouraged me to get into it, and I was lucky enough that there was a really good club that was really supportive and would provide pilots for me, and they had a tandem, which was brilliant. So in a way, there was an element of luck that the Manchester Velodrome, the National Cycling Centre, was on my doorstep. So and the fact that it was a brilliant club there who would facilitate, and were always really good at making sure I can get there every Wednesday night, and they'd always find a pilot for me. So in a way, it's almost like a little element of luck in a way, but you know, if you sort of look for it, the opportunities are there. Ultimately, it does. I think in a way, every sports person will say it didn't fall into their lap, but there was always an element of there happened to be a club on the doorstep, or you know, that sort of thing. It's sort of, you know when you're 12 years old and you're looking to join a cycling club, you don't go out there looking for things. It almost sort of just happens to you, really, in a way. So that's sort of the way I got into it.
Okay. Yeah, because that makes sense, because it's, it's accessibility to, to various, to sports is kind of not easy at the best of times. So, well, I'm thinking, I'm a mum of 3 kids, and actually, in the end, we ended up, restricting ourselves to the sports that were offered at school, just because I couldn't drive. So, hence, my boys do rowing because they do rowing at school. My daughter plays hockey because hockey's taught at school. So, but it's, she could be, she could be an amazing cyclist if, but it's kind of not really having the facility. So where did it come from? So you said you kind of joined at 12. At what point what was the turning point where, we were talking about this before, where your coach sort of like tapped you on the shoulder and said, your times are really good, lovey. How about, you go forward to these games? What was the progression like for you as a kid in cycling?
So I joined Club Sports City Velo, who were, like I say, were brilliant for me, and they were always really good at kind of facilitating everything and giving me the opportunities. I can't thank them enough. They had some great coaches, and they put me in touch with some brilliant pilots, and ultimately it's sort of London kind of was sort of kind of way too early for me. I was 16 at the time, but after London, I got onto the Paralympic Development Programme for British Cycling at the age of 16, which is kind of their performance pathway, basically. So that's sort of it. And I got approached from my pilot at the time. We got approached by British Cycling because we've sort of been on the scene, kind of racing, and we had some good results at national championships and things like that. So they got in touch with us to bring us onto the programme, which was brilliant. So yeah, and then I sort of went through the development program from there, really. So kind of come 15, 16, it was always sort of a sort of turning point for me. Not necessarily that anyone sort of said, oh, have you thought about doing this? It would just sort of almost happened sort of naturally from kind of progress from doing it on a Wednesday night as a little hobby to thinking, well, actually, this is something that I'm all right at, and you can kind of look at those sorts of pathways, really. So it's the turning point for me was being approached by British Cycling and being able to get onto their performance pathway, and it sort of I went through the stages until about 18 and got through onto their podium program, which is the full-time kind of senior squad from 18. So there was kind of no kind of moment where it's sort of like, oh, I'm going to do this as a job. It's almost in a way just sort of happened naturally, and
you sort of trip into it, don't you? So
in a way you get the opportunity, you think, well, I'm not going to say no, but you don't necessarily design to have that kind of from day one, in a way, so yeah.
So how is it? So this is one of the questions from that's come from our little group of coordinators of the forums here in East Anglia, and it's about tandem bikes and cycling. And how did you? What was it like? Did you ever? it's the fear of falling off. What was it like for you? Because you're clearly not in control, are you? When you're, when you're the
Yeah.
oh, what's the term for it? Oh, my husband sometimes tell me on a tandem bike, you're either one or the other. What's the person at the back called?
Stoker. Yeah, Stoker.
Stoker.
And the pilot
Yes,
on the
that's the
front.
one.
Yeah.
Yes. I refuse to be. No, well, especially on my husband's bike, but yeah. Anyway, so how does that feel? How do you overcome that sense of like, oh my god, this is wobbly?
Yeah, I think I was looking up at the age of sort of 12. Like you don't really, in a way, sort of think about that sort of
Yeah, a bit
stuff.
more.
Well, I
Yeah.
certainly didn't. You're a bit more gung ho, and you don't really care in a way, do you? So, and for me, like I sort of said with my dad, I'd always been just encouraged us to get on with these sorts of things. Like, my nana and granddad had a farm, and so when we were kids, we used to do all sorts. We had little jumps for the bikes and stuff. So, for me, it was sort of always kind of, it wasn't kind of unusual or kind of.
Okay.
But that first kind of thought, of like, especially when you get on the velodrome and you look down and you think, God, that's steep, in the bankings, there is certainly an element of like, oh, okay, but I think for me, you just got to trust the person up front ultimately, because if you fight it, you will crash ultimately. So you've got to relax and you've got to just sort of go with whatever the pilot on the front wants to do. I think that's the key, because ultimately, like I say, if you fight each other, that's when you're going to have problems. So so yeah, kind of, there was kind of like I say, I was quite gung-ho anyway. To be honest, if I was doing it now, I think I'd feel a little bit differently, to be honest. I've got a little bit more sensible. But yeah, so, I think there's just got to be that element of trust, and you sort of got like, just in a way, I hesitate to say
go for it, right?
Got to get on with it. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
So what would you say? So let's quickly, I'll let you do that, quickly canter through your achievements, even though we shouldn't be cantering through, we should be relishing every single moment of them. You can tell me what your high points were, and then I'm going to really ask you about, perhaps a low point, perhaps that, a point where you kind of had to fight yourself a bit, where because I'm always of the opinion that we're visually impaired, but I think everybody's got their cross to bear, and everybody reaches a point in their life where that doubt creeps in, and you really have to fight, even though you're doing something you really love and you really, you're really passionate about. Sometimes doubt creeps in. So, if you wouldn't mind, if there's a moment like that, how do you overcome that to then, steam ahead and make it onto that podium as you did? So let's talk about your highs for a bit, and then perhaps if you could tell us about
yeah, of course, yeah,
tough times.
Yeah, there's been a few, don't worry. Well, yeah, so yeah, kind of you kind of introduced, I'm 13-time world champion and 4-time Commonwealth champion and Paralympic champion, bronze medalist. So I went to my first World Championships 18 in Mexico, which was brilliant.
I know.
To be fair,
I really hope
it wasn't a very
came back
nice
with some
place.
maracas, right?
Well, to be honest, they always seem to stick velodromes in the back end of nowhere, to be honest. So,
no maracas then.
Yeah, no. So I went to my first World Championships at 18. I went to the World Championships since then, up until 2020. So for me, kind of, I was successful at everywhere. I came away with medals at every World Championships and gold medals at almost every one. And for me, kind of, the highest of my career, I think there's two really, which is kind of almost the obvious one, and sort of becoming a Paralympic champion. We'd sort of come back from losing at the World Championships 6 months previously. So for us, it was a big comeback, and it was a culmination of a kind of a lot of hard work have gone into it. But for us, we sort of had to go back to the sort of drawing table and sort of start from scratch with everything. So that was definitely it, kind of sitting there and watching the times come up on the board. We were second to last off, so we knew we had one person left to go before we could actually find out who'd won. So I remember it being stood there in the middle of the track centre with my pilot Scotty, and just sort of trying to, I say watching the scoreboard, I was looking at the scoreboard but I can't see a thing. Just sort of like hoping. I could see the little orange box, which basically meant Paralympic record or not, and we just broke the Paralympic record, so I knew if I saw the orange box then we'd lost. But if we didn't, then we'd won. So it's kind of that kind of, not necessarily kind of like even sort of stood on the podium, that bit stood in the track watching the scoreboard is a bit that kind of was the big high for us, is that sort of moment of realization that we'd done it. You know, so once you got on the podium it sunk in a little bit, you know, and don't get me wrong, it's amazing to get those medals, but it was that sort of instant kind of gratification when it sort of came through, kind of that relief, that was the kind of big high. And then the second one for me for career high was at the Gold Coast in Australia, 2018 for the Commonwealth Games. For the kilo there, we broke the world record, and we beat the Australians on home soil, which was never a good idea. But the crowd were unbelievable, because I'd never been in a packed velodrome, because unfortunately with the sort of para sport, you know, we don't get the big crowds that the kind of able-bodied guys do. So to be in a packed velodrome was unbelievable, and to have the Australians, even though we've just sort of beaten their competitors, give us a standing ovation was just incredible. So that's another kind of big moment that always sort of sticks in my head as like a big high, really. So yeah.
Brilliant. Oh my god, yeah, no, hats off to the Australians for being good sports. That's nice.
Definitely.
So
yeah, I think that's what made it as well. Yeah,
oh, I'm sure it is. It's just it's brilliant. So tell me a couple of moments, because you mentioned, kind of touched upon one. It's like, you know, it didn't quite happen for you in one of the competitions. So what perhaps one or two moments that you had to really push through to, you know, regroup, and, you know, what would you have said that your, you know, mental strategies were, physical strategies, but it's probably more mental, isn't it? It's sort of like getting back into the game, getting your head back in.
Yeah, well, that's it. I think there's a couple, and again, but two actually, again, in a way, that sort of that stand out to me. That one that I touched upon, we lost at the World Championship 6 months before the Games. So for us, it was like, you know, this is the worst time to lose, you know, just before the Games. But we say now, when we look back on it, it was the best thing that ever happened to us. Because we went, like I say, we went back to the drawing board and we started from scratch with all our training and our approach, our relationships with our coaches, our relationships with each other on the bike, and sort of basically we left no stone unturned, and ultimately it worked. But at the time, it was the hardest process. At the time, it was one of the hardest processes I ever went through, and sort of probably the coaching team would agree, and Helen, my pilot, she would probably also have agreed as well. But like you say, it's that mental strength of, ultimately you get tested, how much do you want this, in a way. I mean, it's not as simple as that, because everybody wants it, but sometimes these challenges can just be too difficult. But you know, we just wanted it so much, and it was that, like I say, mental strength that sort of pushed us through it. And, you know, we made sure that as soon as we come into that velodrome, you know, nothing else mattered. You know, each training day, that was all that mattered when we were in that velodrome, and that focus was always there. So yeah, and when we were lucky enough and we worked hard enough, and it came off for us come Rio, and we went away with the gold medal, which was an incredible experience. And then the other was later on. I got injured at the end of 2018 in the gym, and I ended up having to have hip surgery after the World Championships so we had the World Championships in March 2019, and then about 10 days after we got back, I went for my operation. And that was a long kind of process, from the first getting injured through to actually kind of a come back to racing. Was a kind of, you know, 12-ish months, probably around about 12 months really. So it was a really long process for me, and kind of that was a kind of a different kind of challenge, you know. Ultimately it was all on me. I was the only one that could actually have an influence on it, really. Because when you're on a tandem, you're in everything together, in a way. you know, and you race together, you train together, everything you do
Mhm.
is as a partnership. So if you've both got to give 100% to get the most out of it. So
Mhm.
for me to sort of be doing something on my like own in a way was very different, because
Mhm.
it's not the way I'd trained.
No.
So it was sort of quite, it was sort of weird to kind of get my head around that, like, this is just me here now, you know, this is only I can affect this. But which the kind of the rehab was quite slow. We kind of, the healing process took a little bit longer than we kind of not hoped, but kind of first kind of planned and anticipated for, with conversations with surgeons and things like that. But that for me was the hardest thing I've ever gone through in my career, and probably in sort of my life, really. And it kind of really kind of pushed me to kind of like, and again, in a way, how much do you want it? So for me, it was sort of that's kind of the biggest low in my career. And ultimately, I think it's sort of that hard work played a part of my decision to retire early, sort of physically and mentally. But coming back from that was probably kind of the one thing that meant the most to me, to win the race after I sort of come through all that rehab and done it on my own. To come back and win was the probably the personal kind of biggest goal, you know, for me and everything. So yeah, so like, you know, sport isn't just, everyone sort of sees the race and everyone sort of sees people win and think, oh, you just rock up every 4 years and just sort of win gold. But it's not as simple as that. And I think it's sort of, there's a good picture that goes around social media. It's like a little podium with 3 blocks for the podium, and then it's sort of like the ground, and then underneath it all, it's got like all like determination, rehab, training, like loads of other blocks. That it's a bit like an iceberg, you know. There's more of it's underneath the water in a way, you know. So yeah, so it's sort of, it's not as sort of as simple and straightforward as sort of people not necessarily kind of think, but can fall into the trap of thinking. I think everybody does when they watch sport. You think, oh, that, you know, that minute of that kilo is sort of the only thing. And I can watch race and think, oh, you just sort of rock up and do it, because you forget in a way that the day-to-day stuff that all goes into it. So
well,
so, yeah.
It's we at my daughter's school, we had crikey, there's a lady who did she I can't remember her name anymore, but she was an Olympia world championship. But anyway, hammer throwing. It's like,
Okay.
you talk about your 1 minute. It's just like,
Yeah.
and it's done. It's like done, literally years and years and
seconds,
training condensed into what, I don't know, however many seconds that throw takes. It's just like,
if it goes wrong as well, it's like,
oh dear, and it's when it goes wrong, it goes wrong in a split second. Oh my goodness. So, but that's what it's like, isn't it?
It is,
so, but I'm going to ask you one more thing about, and then we're going to go and do some myth busting, right? So what are you doing now? So you said you retired from cycling, because you're terribly old now, aren't you? So you retired from professional cycling. It's just mucking around in the neighborhood with the kids now, right? So what are you up to these days?
Like I say, I retired in June, just gone. So and last week I started at university. I'm doing a history degree. So it's another one of my passions that I've enjoyed ever since I was young. Like, I remember I used to sit there and watch Time Scene, once being an archaeologist as a kid. So I think it's sort of from that. So I'm hoping to kind of use that in my sort of career going forward. But so a history degree is what I'm doing now. Slightly different cycling. But I'm enjoying it so far anyway, touch wood.
Who knows, Sophie, you might find parallels. You go, that's just like cycling. Remembering all of this is just as difficult as it was. Who knows? So what I said about the myth busting, and this is something that we kind of touched upon in our little chat, is that there is this common misconception out there that people who are successful, like you clearly have been, have to believe in themselves. That there's this thing about, you have to believe in yourself, that's just not true, is it? It's because as I said, there must have been moments, even when you were on that last race, even when you were on track, that you thought, I don't actually believe in myself, this is Because
100%.
actually right now I don't believe in anything because my life is consumed by an awful lot of pain and I need more oxygen, I think is so. What is it like? Tell me, what is it like?
Yeah, I think that there is, like I say, a myth's a good way of putting it, in a way, that like every athlete believes in themselves 100% of the time, and I don't believe anybody when they say that, ultimately, because there's all, you doubt yourself every day. You doubt yourself. You're in the middle of an effort and think, God, nah, it's too hard, this. Like, ultimately, like, am I good enough? Like, if you have a rubbish day in training, your times are slow, and you think, like, well, but you just keep plugging away just because it's what you do, and you love what you do, and ultimately it's not a self-belief that drives you. It's a motivation because you want to win, but you don't believe in yourself every day. I certainly didn't, and I like I say, I would challenge anybody who said that they believed in themselves 100% of the time, because ultimately, I think it's just rubbish. They're saying, like, you have your down days, and you're like, well, am I good enough for this? Ultimately, like, you're only as good as your last result, and if your last result was no good, then and all that, and all that sort of stuff. And I think for a lot of people, and they say, oh, I believed I was going to win. I think, you're confident in your ability, but you don't know, because ultimately there are other people that you can't control. Your competitors, you can't control what they do. If they come out and do a storming time, and they go and break the world record, well, you have to put your hands up and say, well, ultimately they were the better person on the day. And I think as long as you're motivated and you believe that you can get there, but believing in yourself every day, I think is sort of, is a myth's a good way of putting it. I think a lot of people would say when they win a race, the most overwhelming feeling isn't sort of like, oh, I believed I could do that, but it's utter relief that you've done it. That it's all paid off, really. That's the big thing.
Yeah, because I'm trying to sort of, I think, sketch out. It's almost, sketching out what it feels like to, I'm very passionate about doing things that you love, not because they will necessarily bring you money or whatever it brings you, but as long as you're doing something that you truly love, you could not be anything other than successful, because the returns that you get give you personally that sense of absolute achievement and accomplishment, and just flood your body with the hormones that just go, oh God, this is so amazing. So it doesn't matter. And even when you do things that you love, things happen that will knock you off course, that will but as long as it's like, no, this is what I love, this is, it's like, with your you've done your cycling, and now you love your history, and it's like, things happen, bad, a bad evening, bad revision, stuff just happens. But ultimately, when you stick with, the love of what you're doing, that is, I think that's probably the best blueprint for having. Would you, I mean, you're saying yes, but would you agree with that? I think that's where it lies, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head there, in the way that, like, if you do something you love, you'll be successful. It might not be measured in the amount of money you have, or like obvious sort of, you think, oh, that's successful. But ultimately, you're happy every day, and you're fulfilled every day, and you want to go to work, and ultimately that's the success, is that you're happy in what you do every day. And I think, kind of, that sort of can get missed a little bit. And I think I completely agree. If you're happy in what you do, and you enjoy what you're doing, like you say, you love it, and you're passionate about it, then you'll be successful. I completely agree.
So do you now feel, because I think a lot of people are kind of missing, because you obviously encourage in a really good and positive way to, to go for that passion. I think a lot of people are a lot less fortunate in that, you kind of get squeezed into pathways that perhaps don't suit you so terribly, especially, if you're visually impaired. It's just like, oh, you've got to do this, and you've got to learn that, and whereas actually nurturing a child with a visual impairment in what they want and love to do regardless of what that is probably quite hard for a parent to do. I mean, obviously your dad's an exception, hats off to him. But I think for a lot of parents, it must be quite hard, when there is a love there to actually go, no, go for it, because, and just stand by that and behind it, and just embrace it. So I presume you now have that kind of reference point of feeling in your body when it's right for you.
I think so. I think you sort of you know deep down ultimately kind of what's right for you, and like you say, it's tough for parents, because ultimately, as visually impaired people, we're never going to be a brain surgeon, a micro brain surgeon, because you can't see it ultimately, So there is an element of, there's some stuff you can't do. But I think it's not about, I think people focus on what you can't do rather than what you can do or what you can make work. And I think, I was very lucky that my dad and my mum were like that. Ultimately, if I couldn't do something, then we'd either try and adapt it or find a different route. It wouldn't be that, oh, you've got to do this because, it's sort of, I was sort of very lucky that that was sort of the attitude of my parents in a way. Because I think also it was quite lucky for me in a way that I was the only sort of one in the family with a visual impairment. So, I just ran around with my cousins and my little brother just doing all sorts. So it's sort of, I was sort of brought up that way anyway. If you can't do it, you figure it out. Like my dad says, if you can't see it, just get closer. There's no point in moping around and thinking, feeling sorry for yourself in a way. And I think, I've sort of got quite a brutal kind of mentality with stuff like that in a way, because that's just sort of how I was sort of brought up. But ultimately, so it worked for me, and I was lucky enough that I could ride a bike for a living. It doesn't get much better than that, really, does it? So I think
So Sophie, before we finish, if I could ask you, I think it's, if you, obviously, because you've seen the world of Paralympics, you've seen the world of disability, you must know other people with visual impairment and all sorts, and there must be certain things that you find really not frustrating, but if there is one piece of understanding that you would give to every visually impaired person or every disabled person, to what would that be? What would you give to the world to to find perhaps joy or drive or fulfillment in what they do in life? What would that be? What would you give from your experiences, if you could wave a magic wand? What would you give?
I think for me, kind of the one thing that worked for me, and that I always sort of tell people when I get asked this question, it's quite a tough one in a way, because everybody's different.
Yeah, it is.
But what worked for me, and the reason I did what I did and what I'm doing now, is ultimately because I gave every opportunity a go. I was always encouraged to, like, if you've got an opportunity, don't be scared of it. Yeah, you might be a little bit nervous and you might be anxious to start something for the first time, or try something completely new, or do a career change, or whatever. But ultimately, you've got to sort of take that opportunity. You've got to grab it by the horns. And I think sort of for me, that's the thing that I always say is kind of, you might be nervous because you worried that you won't be able to see something if you do a different job. You're not sure how to get there, or getting around different places. That's always a big thing for me. Like, if I don't know places, that's kind of, I get nervous, and that's when I sort of try and find my way out of it. But I'm like, well, no, because that's when I'm going to isolate myself, or I'm going to, like we talked about earlier, narrowing the paths for myself rather than sort of doing it for other people doing it for you. And I think I was always encouraged to kind of, if you've got an opportunity, why not? Ultimately, the worst thing that happened doesn't work out, but you'll be fine.
I know.
You're not going to die, are you? So,
well, it's not just that. It's not a personal reflection on you, is it? It's just, I think everybody, there's kind of a sense that people take failure situations really personally and really to heart. When actually it's just stuff that happens. And if you have that attitude of sort of like, well, there's no opportunity wasted, then that one didn't work out, but
It's one of them,
there's
have
loads
no
more.
regrets. It's quite
Yeah.
cheesy, but it's sort of, it kind
Yeah.
of fits in, doesn't it? Ultimately, if you try something
Yeah.
and it didn't work out, at least you won't sit there when you're 80 and think, oh, what if I'd have done that? You don't know, you know. At least then you know. I think that was always the thing for me, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Brilliant. Right. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you so much. Oh my God,
Thank
this
you
has
for
been
having me.
amazing. So, right. So I'm just going to say quickly bye to
Yeah.
everybody on Facebook now. So guys, I hope that you have found this as extraordinary as I have, because I mean, of all the guests that I've had on my In Conversation, I mean, Sophie's probably the highest flyer so far, aren't you, buddy? And it's just been absolutely amazing. And I hope you kind of stay a friend of the Norwich Guide Dog Forum. We might
Keep following,
have you
definitely.
back at some point, that would be really, really, really lovely. So, and I hope that, you know, you've all taken away, you know, something from, you don't necessarily have to be exceptional, but there's just, you know, when you approach things with, you know, like Sophie said, you know, no opportunity wasted. It's, you know, rather than close down opportunities for ourselves, which the world is quite readily happily to do, you know, it's, yeah, it's, if you let it, honestly, you end up with a universe as tiny as this, you know, it's nothing. But if you kind of just keep going for every opportunity, if it works out or not, then hey, you know, the experience is there. So anyway, so on that note, I'm going to wish you all goodbye and say thank you to Sophie again, and I'm sure that you're going to join me in that as well. And I will see you next week when I'll be talking to our very own Scott Balance, who, as he bravely pointed out, he would have been an Olympian as well if bowls hadn't been cancelled off the Paralympics. So next week we'll be talking to Scott about his bowling, and I'll see you all then. Thank you so much, and I'll see you then. Bye.